I'm starting a new series today called The Jesus I Never Knew. And that title comes from a book that I read way back in 1995 by an author by the name of Philip Yancey. It's really a wonderful book if you like to read cool things. And it was a book, at least when I read it, it had a big influence in my life. He grew up evangelical in and around Atlanta, and very, very conservative understanding of who Jesus was, but also very surface understanding of who Jesus was. And this is just a journey for him as he goes deeper in the message of Christ. I would encourage anybody here to read it. I think you'd be richly blessed. The idea behind his book was that most of us know a limited amount about Jesus, and most of the info we know is fairly sterile. We kind of got in our mind from when we went to maybe Vacation Bible School, Jesus with a lamb on his shoulders, and so we think we kind of get that he's kind and he's good, and we know that he was born in a manger, and we kind of get this idea that he did some cool teaching. We're not exactly sure what all that's about, but he did some cool teaching, and people didn't like him, and we're not exactly sure why they didn't like him, but they didn't like him. Oh, and he did some miracles, and that was really cool, and so we kind of have an idea about the miracles. And then we know that they crucified him, and we know he rose from the grave. And those are all important, wonderful things to know, but maybe there is a level of understanding deeper than maybe we had possibly thought or not thought possible. And so that's what we're going to do. We're not going to use the book at all except for this title for the series, but we're going to kind of try to take the same idea and try to look at some Jesus stories and look at them deeper. Try to maybe look beneath the surface a little bit. I'm really excited about this. The weeks ahead, I think, are going to be very, very cool. Next week especially, I'm excited about a talk next week about Jesus as our teacher, and I encourage you to come and be a part of that. Today I want to talk about the first miracle that Jesus performed. John records it in John chapter 2, and it's called the miracle of the turning the water into wine at Cana of Galilee. So I want us to spend some time. I want you to know this is not a story that I ever heard growing up, because I came from a church that was a teetotaler church, where drinking was not talked about, was not allowed, and if they ever alluded to this talk, this story, the big emphasis was on the fact that Jesus did not turn this into real wine. He turned it into grape juice. And so that was the real, they spent enormous amounts of time making sure you understood that this was not like real wine. This was just Welch's grape juice. So I didn't hear much about this growing up, but I think it's a very important story. So what I want to do is I want to read it all the way through, then I want to talk about it just a little bit, then I want to try to get some applications. We'll start surface and see if maybe we can go a little deeper, all right? John chapter 2, verse 1. On the third day, John just letting us know on the third day, this might trigger something in our minds later, but on the third day, a wedding took place at Cana in Galilee. Jesus' mother was there, and Jesus and his disciples had also been invited to the wedding. When the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, "They have no more wine." "Dear woman, why do you involve me?" Jesus replied. "My time has not yet come." His mother said to the servants, "Do whatever he tells you." Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, "Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best till now." This, the first of his miraculous signs Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. Now, just a little side note, this is only recorded in the Gospel of John. Interesting how the others processed information as the Holy Spirit led them. John is the only one that mentions this story. The other 3 Gospels, which were written much earlier, did not include this. But John, who thought about it for decades, because he had seen it, and he thought about it for decades, knew that it needed to be written down and it needed to be shared. And that's why we are talking about it today. So let's dive into the story. We have a family occasion, a beautiful wedding. And Mary has been invited to the wedding, which is at Cana of Galilee, which is a small village, very small village, 6 to 8 miles away from Jesus' hometown of Nazareth. It's quite possible that Mary had been asked to do some of the organizing with the wedding because it was she who started panicking about the lack of wine. Some of you have that gift. You just are going to be the one that's going to be asked to be a part of the organizing of things. Susan obviously is one of those. Chris is one of those. There's certain people that you just think, would you organize this for us? And Mary seems to be in that place because she is the one that's getting very, very nervous and uncomfortable when she realizes the wine is running out. According to one of the apocryphal Gospels, and I shouldn't have said that word, probably that's not a common word for people to think about, but apocryphal means fictitious. There was a lot of stories that emerged in the first century that are called fictitious Gospels. They're just kind of interesting stories, but most people don't think that they necessarily are considered true. But one of the apocryphal Gospels has Mary as the sister of the bridegroom's mother. They say that's why she's involved in this thing. But whatever it is, she is very much involved in this wedding process, and she is very much aware that the wine is running low. Interesting, there's no mention of Joseph. This lets us know that he probably is dead by this time. It also lets us know why Jesus was probably 30 before he began his ministry. He stayed at home, probably helping his mother with the smaller children that had been born in their family. And when the smaller children got old enough, then he was able to begin his itinerant preaching ministry because Joseph is not a part of the deal. Here's the context of our story. It's a simple village wedding taking place in Cana. But it certainly wasn't like your wedding. I know it wasn't like mine and Jane's wedding because this wedding would have gone on for days. I kind of like the idea. It's kind of a cool thing that they make it a festival, a feast, something that is going to take place for days. The actual ceremony took place after the feast and at the very height of the festivities. Then the happy couple would be escorted to their new home using the most tortuous route possible. They'd be illuminated by the light of flaming torches so that everyone in the small village could share in their happiness. Can you picture it? It is just a fabulous Middle Eastern celebration. It's going to take a week, and it's going to be a lot of fun. And it didn't end there when they got to their home. There was no sneaking off now for a honeymoon. That was unheard of. Oh no, for the next week, the newlyweds would have to hold open house. I mean, their house was the center of activity in the community. They would still be dressed in bridal clothes and with crowns on their heads, and they would be treated like king and queen. And for one glorious week, their word was law. This was a fun time. And it's interesting because in this land, which was a land of poverty and constant hard work just to scrape by, this would be a week that would be remembered for the rest of their lives. This is it. This is the most fun week anybody would ever have. This is their week. This is their time. Of course, for such a happy occasion, it was vital for everything to work like clockwork. It was important. Very important. So Mary is scurrying around making sure everything's going well, and Jesus is there, and Jesus has 5 disciples. He has just invited 5 to follow him. They've come to the party. I don't know how much advance notice they had that these disciples would be coming, but it's 5 more mouths to feed. It's 5 more glasses to fill. And I don't know how it worked then, but I know that Jane sometimes will give me that evil eye when we'll be planning for 4 for dinner, and I'll say, I invited a few more, and she'll say, how many more did you invite? It's like 6 more, and it's like, I got to take food for 4 and stretch it for 10. It's like, you can do it, honey. I just know if anybody can do this, you can do this. And she'll roll her eyes, and she always makes it work. But maybe that's where the well-laid plan started to go wrong, and Mary suddenly realizes there's not going to be enough wine. There's not going to be enough wine. Now, wine was a huge part of the celebration. A huge part of the celebration. This was a pretty common saying in the first century. Look on the screen. The rabbis would say, without wine, there is no joy. Without wine, there is no joy. Sharon said something similar to that this morning when she first got here, I think. Not really, but anyway, I think I got the essence of what you were saying. It was something like that. It was such an important part of the festivities. Now get this, it wasn't about people getting drunk. That was always a prohibition. The Bible speaks very, very clearly about drunkenness, and I don't want anybody to misunderstand. We have people in our church that have serious issues with alcohol, and we think it is the wise person, when that is a problem, who says, you know what, I don't go down that path. I go down other paths. That is wisdom. That is very smart. So we're not talking about drunkenness, but we're talking about it is definitely a part of their culture. It represents life. It represents joy. It represents celebration. It represents the very best of life. So to fall down on such a simple thing as the provision of an essential ingredient of a wedding feast, this would have been a terrible humiliation for this young couple. You have no idea. If the wine runs out, the party ends. It's still early in the week. The party's got to go on. It ends. So Mary is frantic. She is frantic. What is going to happen? What do we need to do? Jesus is there. So she wonders, could he maybe help? Is she thinking he's going to perform a miracle? Or is she simply turning to her son in desperation, saying, you got any ideas? What a spot Jesus finds himself in. What does he do? He's in the middle of a happy family occasion in an ordinary home in a small Galilean village. Does he do nothing and watch the party dissolve into disappointment and humiliation? Or does he reveal something of his true nature in this carnival-like atmosphere? My time has not yet come, he says to his mother, but that didn't stop him from acting. It didn't stop Jesus from showing compassion, kindness, sympathy to these ordinary people on this extraordinary day. It didn't stop him from making a public demonstration of his power through the first of what would become many miraculous signs. Mary turns to Jesus, and she knows the wheels are spinning. She knows he's going to do something. And then she turns to the servers there, and she says, whatever he asks you to do, please do it. Jesus asked for 6 pots that were used for ceremonial cleansing to be filled with water. The servants jump to it. They do exactly what he asked them to do. These jars are made of stone, and they hold between 20 to 30 gallons of water apiece. When they are filled with water, there's no big show of it. They're filled with water, and then Jesus says to the servants, draw some out, take it to the master of the banquet. That's like the wedding coordinator. Take it to the master of the banquet. They take it to him. He tastes it, and he says, my, oh, my. I can't believe that this is the best wine I've tasted. Normally, they serve the good wine on the front end of the party and the bad wine at the end of the party, but you have done the exact reverse. And then the manager of the wedding goes to the bridegroom and says, you have saved the very best till last. Then John ends the story by pointing out that this was a miraculous sign. This was the first one Jesus performed, John says. Jesus revealing his glory and the disciples putting their faith in him. Let me give you a little more context, and then we'll get into some application, all right? John, for those of you who are trying to read the Bible, study the Bible, John is a different sort of gospel. John was not written to get the facts out. That's not the sense you get when you read John. John was written with the assumption that people already know the facts about Jesus. It has even been suggested that John is written almost like a commentary to the other Gospels. John is not looking to tell his readers what happened in Jesus' life nearly as much as he wants to tell the readers what the life of Jesus means. He's very big on giving you that understory, what this really means. You read Matthew and Luke when you talk about the birth of Jesus, and they go into great description of going to Bethlehem and the manger and the shepherds and all this storytelling that they give us about what's going on. John just says, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory. So John goes at it a totally different way. It's very, very cool. To enter the Gospel of John is to enter a world of symbols and verses that have at least 2 or 3 levels of meaning. And it's the wise person who tries to understand these levels of meaning. John is highly selective about the material he includes. You see, John's got in front of him, in his mind, he's got in front of him probably hundreds of miracles he has seen. But he's only going to spotlight 7 of them in his gospel. He calls them the 7 signs. 7 signs. So John is a very, very interesting read. And that's why it's important for us to understand symbols and metaphor. And don't get hung up on things like, was it really wine? Or was it like Welch's grape juice? That's a silly way to approach it. Now, the only way to get at John is to start out with the assumption that the message John wants to convey is below the surface, and the details of the story are just a means to an end. So what I want to do is I want to look at this story. We'll look at it at the surface first, then we're going to try to go a little bit deeper and see if maybe the Lord doesn't speak to us about some things maybe deeper that can resonate in our hearts. And I hope this will do something for you. I know it's been a blessing to me. So let's jump into it. Insights from our story. First one's real obvious. This is something I think all of you can pick up on, but I still want you to write it down. This holy man Jesus John is wanting us to get this right out of the gate. He is way different than what most imagine. He is way different than what most imagine. Again, the scripture says in verse 1, on the third day a wedding took place at Cana, and Jesus is there, and Jesus and his disciples, they come. Jesus is not afraid of coming to the party. He's not afraid. Now, there are a lot of people who spend their whole life afraid of that. In their mind, they just think that God is not a God of the party. That God is the God of sitting alone, meditating deeply about things. That God is the God of getting up at 3 in the morning and spending 3 hours in prayer and then spending time in solitude all the time. That's what God must be like. But John is wanting us to know right out of the gate, Jesus was way different. He was way different. And this kind of ticked off the big religious group of the day when Jesus walked the earth, which were the Pharisees. The Pharisees, they believed that Israel was in the trouble they were in because of sin. And they believed that the only way to get God's favor back on them was just to live they were just strict on the rules. You don't do anything. You don't have fun. You don't go any place. Certainly you're not going to be extending a party. You're not going to be extending a party by turning water into wine. That's the way the Pharisees thought. But Jesus didn't play that game. He said, when you've seen me, you've seen the Father. And he was at the party. Let's face it, maybe you haven't realized it yet, but God is not nearly as stuffy as most people think. What do people think about Jesus? Just with me, just try to think just a moment. What does the average church person think about Jesus? I think they think he is very somber. I think they think he is highly ticked off at people who aren't doing what he wants. I think they maybe have a sense of him being slightly melancholy. This is just a typical picture of Jesus that was done during the Renaissance period. It kind of looks like a sad guy to me. Just somebody that, I wouldn't really want him on my team, I don't think. I don't think I'd really want to, he doesn't look like he's, you just hear him saying, oh no, let's not do that. Just kind of, But there's another picture, and I like this picture much better. Look at this. This is called the Laughing Jesus. I think this artist had a sense of what Jesus was like. Now, I say this because the Bible is clear. Children were drawn to Jesus. Now, I want you to think about these two pictures of Jesus you just saw. Sandra, go back to the other one, and then go back to this one. Which one are children drawn to? They drawn to the one who's sitting over there saying, oh my goodness, it's raining again. What are we going to do? Or are they drawn to the Jesus that is happy, that's joy-filled, that has a wonderful countenance? I want to suggest children are drawn to the laughing Jesus. Jesus said this once. It's not on the screen, but he said it. He said, the Son of Man. He's talking about the fact that these Pharisees, they just couldn't get it down. They didn't like John the Baptist because John the Baptist and his people, they fasted all the time, and the message was they didn't like his strict message. But then they didn't like Jesus either. Jesus said this, Matthew 11:19. He said, the Son of Man, on the other hand, he feasts, he drinks, and what do you say about him? You say he's a glutton. You say he's a drunkard. You say he's a friend of tax collectors and other sinners. Jesus is saying, you guys can't be satisfied. There's no way to satisfy you. And that's true about religion. It's never satisfied. But I want you to know Jesus was joy-filled. When you look at the laughing Jesus, you see an image full of expression. You can almost hear the sound of laughter coming from his open mouth. But to some, the thought of the Son of God laughing seems almost heretical. I want you to know the people that I have met in my life that, to me, seriously, I just sense they walk with God. There is a joy in them. They are not afraid of the party. They're not afraid of being around people thinking they're going to get contaminated with cooties of some sort. They are perfectly comfortable in who they are in Christ, and they have a joy about them. Sharon, I was thinking about this. Sharon, the week after they were at our church, Sharon's mom had been in very serious illness in the hospital, and they didn't know exactly what was going to take place, but finally they knew her end was near, and I went to the hospital just to give my regards. But I happened to show up at the time when it was just going to be a matter of a few hours and her mother was going to pass. But I had the privilege of sitting with Sharon and her dad in the waiting room while Jimmy went back with another minister, family member, friend, to be in the actual room those last moments with her mom, and I was with Sharon and her dad. And I'll never forget, as they talked, and I knew it was my place. I was supposed to be there with them, and they were just talking. And they were grieving. Of course they were grieving. But in the midst of the grief, they were filled with joy. I've not seen that often. Genuine joy. You talked about your mom. You talked about how straight-laced she was. You said that as she got older, you tried to teach her how to cuss, but she never could even get the... Do you remember that? Sharon said, she said, I tried to teach Mom to cuss, but she never could. It just didn't work for her. But I just remember there was so much laughter, and then tears, and then laughter and tears. And I thought about it, and I thought, that's what it's like for people who know God. They know this joy-filled God of ours, this God that provides to us abundant life. They know what that's like. And so, yes, they cry. Yes, there's heartbreak. Yes, there's sadness. Yes, there's separation. Those things are true. But also through it all is the sense of joy. That's what I see when I think about Jesus. He was not the holy man people thought they were going to get, but he was exactly the holy man that we needed. Second insight is this. Write this down. Listening to and obeying Jesus in every situation is a very wise decision. Again, this is very surface. There's nothing deep here. It's just you read the story and you think, yeah, that's a good point. Listening to and obeying Jesus in every situation is a very wise decision. Again, when the wine was gone, Jesus' mother said to him, they have no more wine. And Jesus says, dear woman, why do you involve me? Verse 4. This story used to bother me a little bit because in the King James, which I grew up reading, in the King James, listen to how he says it, the King James, just the emphasis sounds so hard. He says, woman, what have I to do with thee? Mine hour is not yet come. And I always thought, man, if I said to my mother, woman, what have I to do with thee? She'd have knocked me out. I still wouldn't say that to my mother. There's no way I'd say that. But I've realized now, as I read this, the original language, what Jesus is saying is very normal. His response to her is very respectful. There's no disrespect here. He's just saying, my time has not yet come. My time has not yet come. His identity as Messiah is not yet to be publicly revealed. You know, there's an interesting story that Max Lucado wrote. He wrote it a long time ago. He's a great Christian writer. If you ever want to read anything great, read Max Lucado. But Lucado writes about, and this is totally a made-up story, but here's the essence of the story, that these angels are up in heaven, and he says, I want you to imagine you're one of the angels. The angels are in heaven, and they are thinking about how Jesus should reveal himself to the world as the Messiah. And so one says, I know he should feed thousands on one occasion. That would be a fabulous way to just introduce himself to the world. And they said, yeah, that's great. Somebody else says, no, how about if he obliterates sickness and all the people that are around him? One great move. That would be wonderful. Someone else has another idea, and they're talking about it, and Jesus is on the earth, but they're up there talking. They say, let's watch. And so they look over the portals of glory, as we'd say in the old days. They're looking down, and Jesus is at this wedding, this tiny little wedding in this tiny little town. And the mother says, what should we do? And suddenly Jesus says, my hour's not yet come. And the angels are like, yeah, we know this wouldn't be a good place for him to do his first miracle. But then Jesus says, go get me those 6 jars, huge containers of water. And he begins to do his miracle. And Lucado just presents the idea that when Jesus sees suffering of any kind, he wants to make a difference. He wants to change. Which says to me that when I am hurting and when I feel like nobody knows, I mean, Jesus could have certainly sat through this event. He didn't have to perform this miracle. Nobody would have ever heard of this story. It would have sat just as a part of where he didn't do it. He's obviously many places he didn't always perform miracles. But for some reason, something resonated in him, And even though he had not done a public miracle before, this would be his first. But it's because people were willing to listen and do what he says, and he makes a difference in their life. His mother says to the servants, do whatever he tells you. Do whatever he tells you. Jesus could fix the problem, but it was going to happen because people were willing to work and do the things he told them to do. The people needed to listen to him. So he says, get the 6 jars, and they go and they get it in a moment. John wants his readers to see the importance of recognizing that it's Jesus who is the difference maker. He wants to be the one who makes a difference in your life. And you need to trust him because he cares for you. He wants to make a difference in your life. He wants to make a difference in your life. Third insight from the story is this. Participating with Jesus in something miraculous is about as good as life gets. Participating with Jesus in something that is miraculous is about as good as this life gets. Write this down just on the side somewhere. Servants always see the miracles. Servants always see the miracles. Nobody else saw the miracles that day, but the servants did. Those ones who did what Jesus said, they saw what happened. John is wanting his readers to know this was the servers and the disciples who walked away that day knowing that this was the real deal. They had just seen something amazing. I think John wants us to see that we are often a vital part of Jesus' transformational work. I know in my own life, when I have done what Jesus said to do, I have served him in those moments, I have seen miracles. When I'm on the sideline, not really engaged, not really trying to be a part, not really wanting to help, not really a part of trying to be his arms and his feet, I don't see a lot. But when I jump into the fray, I try to do what he says to do, I listen to him and try to do what he asked me to do, I see miracles. Fourth thing is this. This is where I think it's getting a little deeper. Jesus can take good and he can turn it into better. Jesus can take good and he can turn it into better. Let me give you a key. To me, you want to get the key to the whole Gospel of John. It's a verse many of us have committed to memory. John chapter 10, verse 10. Jesus says, I am come that they may have life and have it abundantly. I am come that they may have life and have it abundantly. The New Living Translation says it like this. My purpose is to give them a rich and a satisfying life. This statement, I believe, is what this miracle at Cana is all about. Let me say another sentence. Water, which is the basic necessity of life, is changed into wine. But wine is a symbol not just of life, but of abundant life. You get it? Water is a symbol of life. Wine is a symbol of abundant life. If you go into this thinking that wine is evil, you're going to miss the boat completely. Wine in Scripture is a symbol of joy and warmth and celebration and abundance. So in changing water into wine and allowing the wedding celebration to continue, Jesus is cluing people into something very important. He has come to transform the world, to change what is good into what is way better. We often think of transformation in terms of opposites. You know, the Beauty and the Beast, Jekyll and Hyde, a caterpillar into a butterfly. And Jesus does do that. He does take mean and ugly and transforms it into beautiful. That does take place. He takes us when we're crawling on our bellies and he gives us wings to soar. He takes us when we're broken and he makes us whole. All of those things are true. But there is another type of transformation, and I think we see this model at Cana. At Cana, the object of transformation is something that's already good. It's water. Water's good. But he transforms it into something that is even more good, more wonderful. Water is good. The message of transformation at Cana is not about making the bad good, but about making the good even better. And I think that's important. How many times have people thought of their lives and said, well, my life's good. It's good. I've got things going on. I've got a good friends. I got a good family. I got things all right. Wonderful. But he comes to give us even abundant life beyond what we could ever hope or dream. I think that's what he's showing us here. I think the whole idea of the 6 containers, I think that's, and the containers were used for ceremonial cleansing. It was an Old Testament understanding of the law. And he is coming and he is saying, that's all right. But I'm transforming that into a message of grace for you to understand. It is going to be different now. I'm taking what was good and I'm going to turn it into something that is great, so much better. Very, very important for us. It wasn't that the law was ugly or evil or impure. What they had was good. It was just basic, though. It wasn't enough. Jesus is going to come and transform the law and teach us about grace, put God back into the system, put love into it, make it not just like plain water, but make it like wine, giving it texture and taste and letting it warm you as that glow spreads through your veins. Let it free you to love and to laugh. I think that's what he's trying to get us to understand. It's not just life, it's abundant life, joyous life, life lived in freedom. I've read that this week. I've thought how often we settle for just that plain water when he wants to give us abundance, so much more. I think it's very important. I think the size of the miracle is important too. This just kind of dawned on me. 6 stone water jars holding up to 30 gallons apiece, but it says it was filled to the brim. That would be approximately 180 gallons of the best wine imaginable. That equals, I did a little calculation, all right? That equals 682 liters, which equals 908 bottles of wine. Now, this is a small community in Cana. 908 bottles of the finest wine the world has ever known. It seems extravagant. But you know what? He is extravagant. He doesn't just give you a little. He wants to bestow on you fully, more than you could ever possibly imagine. Apparently, the quantity Jesus produced is important to the story. He's not going to give us just a few bottles of $3 Chuck, I think is what it goes for now. It's not going to be a few bottles of $3 Chuck. It's going to be 908 bottles of the good stuff. God is a wonderful God. We serve a God whose name is not duty, but his name is love. And he wants to pour it out on you. What John is trying to say here is that when the grace of God comes to men, there is not just an adequate supply, but there is abundance. There is an overflowing of grace. Number 5, and finally, write this down. The 5th insight I've thought about this week is every miracle that we see is a sign to those who want to know God. If you want to know God, when you see his miracles, it'll draw you close to him. John writes this in verse 11. This is the first of the miraculous signs Jesus performed in Cana of Galilee. He thus revealed his glory, and his disciples put their faith in him. John doesn't call these miracles. He calls them signs. He records 7 signs in his gospel. And the changing the water into wine is the very first one. None of the other gospel writers even mentioned this. But John saw it was something worth recording. The others were more impressed with healings and exorcisms, but John said that miracle at Cana, that set the course. That's important. He saw at Cana this miracle of water into wine as a sign that would define the very purpose for which Jesus had come. The servants at the wedding saw water turned into the finest wine, but John saw a man in this first sign who was willing to lavish love on his friends, to lavish love on them. John was writing this story down about 70 years after Jesus' crucifixion. This was the last of the books that was written. He had had a lot of time to meditate on the life of Jesus and the effect that it had on the people around him. And he's saying to his readers and to us that wherever Jesus went and whatever group he came upon, it was like he turned water into wine. John is saying this kind of sets the stage. Everywhere he goes, he takes what is ordinary and he turns it into extraordinary. He takes something that just is getting by and he makes it so special. He takes something that's plain and he makes it beautiful. That's who he is. And John says, we're going to set the stage. You'll see this through his gospel. Everywhere Jesus goes, when he comes into a life, he changes it. And that's what I want you to know. He can change your life. You don't have to settle for where you are. You can have so much more by opening yourself up fully to him. It is no coincidence that Jesus took those containers that represented rigid religious ritual and declared that there is spirituality, genuine spirituality that's breaking through now. This is going to be different from this day forward. It is no coincidence that Jesus took the jars used for old purification, the washing of the hands and getting clean, and he declared that he was going to be the way to cleanse us of our sin, to let us stand holy and pure before the Lord. He was going to do that. It is no coincidence that Jesus took the common wedding feast to show that God loves a celebration. He is the God of the party. And that He's calling us to an eternal celebration, not only in this life, but the life to come. It is going to be a fabulous party, and everyone is invited. Everyone is invited to His party. It is no coincidence that Jesus filled the containers to overflowing with new wine, because His ministry was one that overflowed with new grace. It just pours out grace upon us. It is no coincidence that Jesus filled the containers with the best wine that has ever been tasted, because He was showing you that you could shop around and you could try other things, but you're never going to find anything that's going to satisfy you or taste the way Christ tastes in your life. Nothing compares to Him. And it is no coincidence that Jesus performed this miracle without anyone having to earn it or pay for it. It was a free gift, just as grace has always been a free gift. And oh, by the way, it is no coincidence that John says this all happened on the third day, because he knew one day we would be reading the story, trying to understand the depths of Jesus, and we would see that phrase again, on the third day, when people's hearts were broken and they felt so much pain and so much sorrow. But then on the third day, they would realize He is not dead. He is alive. The one who went to the grave is now out of the grave, and He is victorious forevermore. The story of the water into wine is a story of God wanting to do something supernatural in your life even now. Would you bow your heads, please? Our Father, we thank You so much for this day. We thank You for every person who is here. We thank You for the way that You speak to us through Your Word. We thank You for the fact that when life to us seems to be dry and just getting by, not special, You come along and You change everything with a look, with a word, with a touch. You can take our lives and You can transform them from good lives to better lives. Oh, Father, I pray that You will help these things resonate in us. And I pray we'll never forget it. And I pray we will lean on You. And I pray this in the name of Christ. Amen.